Okay, good evening. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, members and guests. This is a regular meeting of the West Shore Photography Club, and this is July the 10th, 2023. Of course, I'm Dennis Baker, the president and your host for this evening. Let me just say that remind you about our meeting schedule. No meeting next week. We have a meeting then on July 20th. It's Thursday, July 20th is the deadline for uploading your image for the upcoming image review. Now, Joe and I haven't yet talked about whether we're going to have a theme for that. So we have to decide that. We're meeting for breakfast on Wednesday, so we'll make that decision and I'll publicize it. But Thursday, July 30th, midnight's the deadline for uploading. And then, of course, the following Monday, July the 24th is the image review. And our very own entertainer, Mike Donovan, will be doing the image review. I'm looking, I have to talk to Mark Albano to try to get the link to the recording for the meeting that Mike did. What did he call that, Joe? Funk photography or something like that?
Yeah, I think that was it.
Okay, I'm curious to see that one, so I got to get the link. Okay, I'm going to turn the meeting over at this point to Joe, who's going to talk to you about trips past and upcoming, and then introduce tonight's guest speaker. So, Joe, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. We actually have a pretty heavy schedule coming up of trips. So we had one on Saturday, went out to Boiling Springs, and Miss Mary Fox, do you want to give us an update on that?
Yes, it was a beautiful sunny day, hot, humid sunny day. And even though the lake was way down in water due to some rehab, it was still beautiful with the gazebo, with the houses. And we went around a lot of streets this time instead of just the lake. And there were about 12 people, I think, that showed up. Some people may have come after the crowd dispersed, and seemed like everybody had a good time. It was a great place, and I wouldn't mind going there sometime in the late afternoon to get a whole different kind of a photography, with the sunlight and the shadows and everything in the afternoon.
Okay, good. We'll have to put that on the do list for our trips coming up here in the fall. That would be good.
Hey, Mary, what do you think about a night photography class downtown Boiling Springs?
I think that'd be great. That you mean a shoot for the evening?
Yeah.
I think it'd be great. I'm not sure if it's lit up at night, but if you're talking like late afternoon, early evening, I think it'd be a great time to get a whole different look with your photography.
Good idea, Jim.
That's not the only place either. I mean, like Fort Hunter's good for that too,
Well, Boiling Springs Lake might be better at night in winter time when they have the little lights around the border of the pool, and they have the lighted
the holiday. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mary. So we do have a night trip coming up this Wednesday, and Eve Smith, you're the boss lady for that trip. So you want to give us an update and what we're going to do?
Sure. We'll be photographing the fountain in behind the Capitol. They have different lights going at night on it through the summer. You'll need a tripod, either a remote trigger or cable release for your camera. Every time you take a photo, it'll be a different photo because they shine different colors on it systematically. And the water level changes constantly. So the fountain is never the same now to 5 seconds from now to 10 seconds. So you get a different shot all the time. Different perspectives are nice too. Straight on to the fountain is great, but off to the side with the Capitol behind it. We'll do it at the Blue Hour, which I think Joe had discussed with me that it's, I think sunset's at 8:30 or around there right now. So we'll meet around 8 o'clock. Is that right, Joe?
Yeah, around there. Yes.
Yeah. In by the fountain. There should be some parking. You could either park in State Street and walk around the Capitol, or you could park on, I think it's 7th Street. Joe has a map for that. But I've shot it half a dozen times and I'll keep going back to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if nobody's been there, this is the kind of a place where you can get a really truly can get a wall hanger shot. Don't you think, Eve?
Yes, definitely, definitely. Yeah, and it varies different colors, blue, green, purple, I think pink, yellow. So every shot is different. Yeah.
Great. And we'll have some folks there to help with settings. And if you look at the announcement that went out, there was a PDF, and I actually produced it a number of years ago for this, but I forgot to change the times and the dates in it. So ignore that in the PDF, but it is this coming Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock. And there's some suggestions about settings and things in there that you might want to do. When you do night photography like that, I know you might be inclined to want to bring a flashlight and to shine it onto your camera. That is very problematic for everybody else because that light from the flashlight will mess up the shots for the waterfall. So you really want to know how to operate your camera without really turning on a flashlight. So you might want to practice that in the dark. That's what I do before I go out when I'm doing night photography. But that'll be a really, really cool trip on this coming Wednesday. Thank you, Eve. Appreciate that. We do have a nighttime workshop coming up also. And that is in Harrisburg. And this is purely night photography, photographing some of the buildings and the contrast and the textures of them, as well as parts of the state capitol, some of the bridges, and that'll be a night photography session, and that will be announced very, very shortly. So we're going to have that one coming up. And was there any other ones that we have state capitol? Oh, yes. On Saturday, the 22nd, we have a Messiah College photo adventure. And this is where we have mentors, which would be like Mark Abano, Elaine Johnston, Mike Donovan, and myself. We're going to be there, and we're going to be walking around the campus photographing in the morning around 9 o'clock. And the idea is to sort of talk about how we see images and to point things out. It's more of an educational function, and we're going to split up into some smaller groups. And that's always a lot of fun. There's a lot of activity there. And that's on July 22nd. We're going to be doing that. And that is, I believe, there's lots of other ones that we have coming up. And we are so fortunate to have Valerie this evening to talk to us about Flash 101. And she has a nice program lined up for us. And we also have a follow-on program and Dick Mesner, you'll be interested in this one. And that is on August the 5th. We're going to be meeting at Fine Art Photo in Lemoyne, and Gary Knobb, the owner of the camera store, is going to take us through Studio Lighting 101. And this will be a very basic kind of a introduction to studio lighting. So Valerie's going to do flash tonight, and then we'll do studio lighting in a couple of weeks from now, and that'll be a fun trip. So that's it. And tonight we have Valerie Hoffman. Valerie's going to take us through Flash 101, which I need myself very badly because I have to do a flash session pretty soon. So Valerie, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could tell us a little bit about you and what kind of workshops you do, and then lead us into your presentation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe. Thank you, everyone, for being here and just for this opportunity. A real quick background. I have been passionately pursuing photography. I think it's safe to say that almost all of my life. And I was in the photographic retail industry for just under 30 years. I was a district manager with Ritz Camera Centers right before they filed, or as they filed for bankruptcy. I don't know if there were any by you. And at that point in 2009, I was laid off, and I moved back here and I quickly got a job with Cardinal Camera, and that lasted a couple months before they started having financial troubles. And so from then on, I have been leading my own workshops and teaching classes, both, online and in person. I absolutely love helping others take pictures. And I average we're doing at least one, what I call them photo treks a month. Some are longer. We have a weekend one coming up in New Jersey for night skies, which has been weathered out, rained out twice so far. So hoping that gets to go. But I'll give you some information at the end on where you can get that info.
Great.
If you can forgive me, I sound a little nasally. I'm on week 12 of a sinus infection, and it won't go away. So, forgive me for that.
Okay, no problem. Valerie, we really appreciate you doing this for us. I know it's been trouble. You've been fighting this for a long time, so we appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem at all. So,
and for everybody else, I want to mention that we're going to ask you to put your questions into chat, and then we'll bring them up to Valerie as we go through. This session will be recorded, and so you'll have it available. And that is it. So Valerie, show's yours.
all right, terrific. And I'll share in a second, but I want to give just a little disclaimer as I get started. And that's, I do not at all consider myself an expert in flash photography. I use flash often, and I'll show you when and where. But as a landscape and nature photographer, I don't use it as often. I shy away from photographing people and portraits and weddings as often as possible. But I do have a pretty good background, and I want to share all of that with you tonight. One of the things as we get started, and I'll just share my screen here, is a lot of people feel intimidated by using flash, whether you have one now and you're intimidated by it, or just you see it and think it's overwhelming. And it really does not have to be at all. All you really need is kind of a basic understanding. And that's what I'm hoping to give you tonight, kind of a good one-on-one and below. And there will be a lot of information here. So I have a lot of text slides to save you from maybe getting lost or trying to scramble and go crazy taking notes. If you're a big note taker like I am, I will share with you guys my notes. I will email them to you, and I'll tell you how that we can go about doing that at the end if you're interested. So that can help you maybe retain the information a little better. All right, so here's the picture that I sent. This is my current, well, it's not even my current. I have even more flashes than that, but have quite a few. And though we're not going to go into it much here, I've used, multiple flash setups at a time as well. So let's quickly go through different types of flashes. And I don't know, maybe you could put that in the chat just for me to know. I don't know what everyone's background is. Do you use flash a lot? Do you never use flash? Are you one that, it's intimidated by using it? So let me know that. That would be good to know, although after the fact. So let's talk about two main flashes, and that's built-in versus external. So your built-in flash, if your camera has one, I have one without and one that does have one built in. It's not a very strong light, so it maybe goes 15 to 20 feet at the most. And its main purpose is really to be used as a fill light, just to kind of fill in some of the light, not as a main light source. Most cameras, even with the built-in flash, will allow for you to use a flash exposure compensation to make it more powerful or a little less, but it will have its limits. So obviously the pros are that it's built in and there's no need to buy any extra gear. But the cons are that it doesn't allow you to do very much creative control, and it does not go very far. Whereas external flash, you have a much more powerful light, and it does offer creative control. You can use it as a main light or a fill light, the same as you would use studio lights. It's just kind of a studio light in a smaller package. You can use it straight on, you can bounce the light, you can swivel and bounce off sides, you can diffuse it, and you can zoom it. So you have a lot of settings, or ways that you can control it that you obviously can't with a built-in one. And you can easily adjust the flash output to be less or more powerful. And then you can add a wide variety of accessories to modify the light. Like I have some things just sitting right aside of me. I don't know if any of you are MagMod users or familiar with that, but you can, quickly pop a diffuser on and a whole variety of things easily. I know that's hard when there's a background, but so that's one of, some of the benefits for sure of an external flash. But so there are your pros. And then the cons are, it's obviously an extra accessory to buy, and they can be, kind of heavy and definitely very costly. I think most flashes now for the manufacturer's flash might be anywhere from $350 to $600. So that's pretty significant. All right. So if any of you are in the,
I'm going to
yes,
interrupt you
sir.
for a second, answer your question about the chat. I think this is a very appropriate session for tonight. He says, I bought a flash and it's still in the box. He says,
All righty.
I don't use it because I don't know how to use it or when to use it. And also
right, well,
I use it if I have more skills. So there you go.
All right, well, I'm sure that I can get you to get it out of the box and get some batteries in and get playing with it. So, and for those of you that might be looking to upgrade from a built-in or get a new flash or whatever, here's just a couple things that I would recommend. Definitely don't buy just based on price. You want to buy based on features. And most flashes, now you can still buy full manual flashes. Any of you remember back in the film days in the Vivitar 283, and it had one pin on the bottom and it was all manual, and that's what a lot of people used. But the benefit of buying one that's actually made for your camera, gives you what we call ETTL metering, which is, kind of evaluative through the lens metering that can automatically be adjusted by the camera and flash. I would get one that has, although they probably all do at this point, an infrared focus assist beam, which will help your camera to focus, like if you're in really low light, maybe almost complete darkness. I definitely would get one that has bounce capabilities. And I really would get one that you can spin from side to side as well, not just up and down. I'm going to guess, but again, I'm not an expert, that most flashes have an auto zoom built into the flash head, which should change then automatically with your focal length. So if you have like a 24 to 105 lens, when you're at 24, it's at its widest angle. And then when you zoom in, then it should concentrate the light a little more too. So those are very useful features. And I would want it to have manual power control. It's really not very intimidating, and just powerful enough to meet your needs. And when I say that, if any of you, some of you were talking about birds and wildlife, a lot of bird photographers, and though I've started shooting birds more, I'm certainly not a serious bird photographer, but a lot of photographers will use flash to help freeze the action. And so if you're planning on doing that, you would want a pretty powerful flash to meet your needs. All right, so maybe we should talk about terms, because that's kind of confusing for people as well. So you'll hear people talk about ambient light, and that refers to your daylight or available light. Flashlight is known as artificial light. ETTL, like I just mentioned a minute ago, it stands for evaluative through the lens metering. And when you have that and you're using it, the camera can adjust the brightness of the flash automatically. So you can get that camera out of the box, put the batteries in, put it on top of your camera. You could leave your camera in full auto and get great pictures of a subject that's within range. Okay. And it'll send out a little burst to help, figure out what the lighting should be. Your recycle time just refers to how long it takes till you can take a second picture after the first one. So how long till it's ready. And there's a little light on the back that will light up maybe green on yours when it is ready to take another shot. And then I don't hear a lot of people refer to guide number anymore, but it does refer to the maximum output of the flash. And that is something that you would want to pay attention to if you need something that's pretty powerful. So on-camera flash is basically one of these external flashes, but you're using it right on the camera mounted in the hot shoe. And then when we talk about off camera, that means taking this flash and now using it anywhere else but right on the camera. So bounce flash is pretty obvious. You can just tilt the head up and down. And then, I was talking about being able to swivel it, and I'll tell you when I might use that. Fill flash, I think, is a big, important term or a thing to understand, because that is really the balancing of your flashlight with the available light, and it gives very natural looking pictures. And then, a lot of your flashes have a little built-in diffuser, which is nice, but any flash diffuser is just something that goes over or in front of the flash to help soften the light. FEC, your camera might have, or flash exposure compensation, that's where you're just adjusting the power of the flash output. So don't confuse that with regular exposure compensation that would be in your camera. Your flash sync speed. When we had film cameras, this was a really big deal. It's not as big a deal now, but what it is the maximum shutter speed at which your camera will fire the flash. And on average, the fastest that will go on most cameras, except for really high-end ones, is around 1/200th of a second. And what will happen is if you set your camera to a shutter speed faster than that, and you have your flash turned on, when you press the button on one of our, more automatic cameras, any digital or auto film camera, the flash, the shutter speed will automatically drop down to that 1/200th of a second. So you can't have a problem. I won't go into what would happen with too fast a flash. And you can test that. Your flash duration is just how long that flash of light is visible, a burst of light. And then flash efficiency is just really used in terms of the maximum effective distance, which is measured from the front of your lens, where you can still get an appropriate brightness or correct exposure using your flash. All right. So here's some key points also to understand after the terminology. Your flash efficiency is dramatically affected by the distance of your flash to your subject. So obviously, the further away your flash is, the less powerful it becomes. And, the closer, then more powerful or more light can hit your subject. And at a certain distance, your flash will not have enough power to illuminate your subject and reflect back, to your camera. So you want to be aware of that. And here's some things that affect the light from your flash. And this again is studio light information as well. So the larger your light source, and this seems confusing to me for some reason, but the larger the source, the softer and more pleasing that light will be. And the smaller the light source, the harsher the light. So that is a good reason why you would use studio lights, which are larger and can give a more pleasing light. But you can bounce the flash, and that will soften the light and lessen those harsh shadows that you might see with the straight on flash. So that would help. And just one thing as we're talking about bouncing is to be aware that when you do bounce the flash, you're also diminishing the power because it has more of a distance to travel, and you're kind of diminishing the efficiency of it. All right. So let's talk about flash exposure. And here's another thing that really took me some time to fully understand. And it's that every flash photograph is actually made up of two exposures happening at the same time in camera. Okay, so I'm going to come to that in a second. And this refers to a question at the end too, that when you press the button with your flash turned on, the flash will fire once the shutter is opened. And during that time, ambient light is also recorded. Your flash exposure is not affected by your shutter speed at all. So you can change that up and down and it just won't affect your flash exposure, but it will affect your ambient light. So the faster the shutter speed, the less light you would see. That's non-flash light, and the slower you will get more. Okay, so keeping that shutter open longer can give it a more natural, pick up more ambient light. But your flash itself is only affected by aperture choice and by the ISO you use. So if you want your flash to be more powerful, you would alter one of those or change one of those. All right, so let's talk about that shutter speed. Again, it only affects that available or ambient light. So using a faster shutter speed, can only just mess with your ambient, but it will darken down, say, the background. And it does help to reduce, say you're shooting a flower and there's a very distracting background, or people and there's a distracting background or something. You can then use your shutter speed and go a little higher, like maybe at the 200th, to cut some of that ambient light and darken it down. So here's some examples. Not a great one, but I happen to notice that I did have this where I used flash. And when I say a faster shutter speed, I mean, like, you take a reading of your subject without the flash turned on and figure out what that would be based on your aperture and everything. And then if you want the background to be darker, then use a faster shutter speed than what that reading would give you. So here I used, I stopped down one stop and got a little bit darker background, because you see how it's just all distracting there in the flower bed. And then in this case, I wanted a little bit of a deeper blue background against my yellow flower. So again, I just went to a little bit faster shutter speed. And in this case too, when you're in like a, with an aquarium or something, there's a lot of distracting things in the back. So a little bit faster shutter speed there. All right. So ETTL, which again is the evaluative through the lens metering, that is absolutely your most simple way. And some of you may just want to, start and hang out there. So again, the flash will communicate with the camera and the two of them can set the exposure for you. And you could keep your camera. I don't know whether, the majority of you use your camera in full auto or maybe in a semi-automatic mode like shutter priority or aperture priority. But you could leave your camera in full auto, even the little smiley face where it kind of does everything. And you should get a good flash exposure if you have that flash set in the ETTL mode. Now, if you're using an older or a manual flash, you don't have that option. But what happens is the flash will send out a quick test and it sets the power based on your light and your subject, the light bouncing back. And it works really well for fill flash. So here's some examples back in the day when I would shoot weddings, but I've used fill flash here and you really can't tell. It's just a nice balance of light. And I did that just with the flash on ETTL. And, if you ever do, like you might do a backlit portrait so you can get a little bit of a hair light or that rim light there. So just by using the flash in an automatic mode as fill, just fills in the shadows in the face. Here's an example where your subject is in the shade, me, but you have a much brighter background. So if you just take a picture, your camera's going to meter for the background if you want a good exposure of your waterfalls, but you're going to be dark or your person's going to be dark. But just turn on the flash. This was just the little built-in flash in the camera and leave it in auto and bam, now you have a nicer balanced image between your background and your foreground. And this was a long time ago too. Here's another time when I might use it. So I live near the Reading Pagoda and I wanted to catch it with the cherry blossoms in bloom. And, if you're just shooting up like that, you're going to probably have silhouetted flowers. So I had an on-camera flash and just popped that, but kept it in auto just so I could get a little bit of light on them and see their color while still balancing with the pagoda. And the same here, when I took a picture just to show the name of the falls, this sign was very dark. So I just popped the flash and then you can kind of light it up a little and I personally, just for the record, like, I don't know Photoshop. I know how to accidentally launch it very often, but so everything that you see is done in camera and maybe with some Lightroom edits, but I would like to save the time of editing and do as much as I can in camera. Here was a very harshly lit day where you can see it was very bright sunlight, and then there's shadows in this butterfly room. And so just using the flash on there helped to balance that out and put some light on my subject that was in shadows. And same with this peacock had all its feathers open, but it was kind of in the shade and looked really flat. And so popping that flash really gave you, some of the nice iridescence on the bird himself. And then again, if you're in an aquarium, they're so dark in there, and usually your subjects are moving. So just popping the flash in there lit up this frog who was in the middle of a snake, and I'm betting he probably wasn't getting a hug. So just hoping maybe it was, but and here's just another good example, and an example where using a faster shutter speed than you probably should use can darken down that background. Now let's talk about the scary manual flash control a little bit. So there are a lot of ways that you can control the flash exposure. All right. One of them is, like I mentioned earlier, with that flash exposure compensation. And your camera may have a button on the outside that has a lightning bolt and a plus and minus. And most cameras that I've used, it's been hidden on the front. Like I used to use Canon all my life, and now I've switched to Olympus, but it may be on the outside of your camera, or you may have to go in the menu under a flash menu and find flash exposure compensation there. But you can use that the same way you would use regular exposure compensation, where plus, gives you more light and minus takes some away. Now, another option is that you can manually change the flash output. So you can just dial in a different setting than what would be on ETTL. So you can go, plus or minus 1/3 or 2/3. You can change your flash to subject distance. Okay, so that will change the power of the flash. Again, like we mentioned, you can adjust your aperture or your ISO. You can diffuse the light with, some kind of diffuser, or you could zoom the flash head. So let's talk about that for a second. Did everybody know that your flash zooms, that it has a head that kind of changes? Most current flashes on the market do automatically zoom, so you don't have to worry about that, and it zooms to match your focal length. There's also generally an indicator on the back screen that'll tell you it's at 24 millimeter or 70 millimeter. If you're using like a 300 millimeter lens, they generally don't go more than 70 or 100 millimeter in what you see as the head adjustment. So that's as narrow as you can get it. But if your flash does not change with your focal length, then as you zoom, the light dispersion on your subject will probably be uneven. Okay, so for an example, if you're using a wide angle lens and your zoom is zoomed all the way in, the light's going to be concentrated in a very narrow beam. And so say you had a group, or even just the size of your image, they're going to be dark. Okay, you're going to have dark edges. It won't be evenly lit. And you can choose to vary that for creative purposes. But if you zoom the head yourself manually, that allows the flash to send out a tighter, narrower beam. Like I said, it can be creative, and it extends your flash range too. So it can make it go a little further than what you might get in ETTL. And it's great for using with wildlife. Now, you can also attach to get even greater distance out of your flash. One of these is called a better beamer. And I know it's hard with a background, but this will just go on the front of your flash, and it has a Fresnel lens, and that concentrates the light, just like there's Fresnel lens in front of, the lighthouse beams and whatever. And so that can extend your flash even a couple 100 feet. So if you're into wildlife photography and you want to use a flash, that might be something you want to pick up. And they're probably $30-ish. All right. So I think we pretty much covered it. FEC is short for the flash exposure compensation. I told you how to look for it. And again, that plus increases and then the minus will decrease the light. And I find I use that all the time. So you can be in ETTL mode and then just dial the flash more powerfully or to the minus to be a little less without much problem at all. But now when I say using the flash in manual, I'm referred to now you're overriding any automatic features and you're going to set the power from full power to half power, etc. Okay. So when you place your flash in manual, then you have, full control of that light. Now, in most cases, you should have your camera in manual mode as well and set your aperture and shutter speed accordingly. Again, the maximum, if you're trying to freeze any action, the maximum you can probably get out of your camera is 1/200th of a second. But you can now control the flash anywhere from full to half power, quarter power, an eighth power, 16th. As you start getting lower than that, like a 32nd and a 64th, that's a very short flash duration, and it will help to freeze any moving subject. So here are a couple examples. A strawberry dropped in some fizzy water, and I want the strawberry frozen, even though it's moving very quickly, and I want to see the little fizzes. So that was at flash at either 64th or a 32nd, 1/32nd power. And if any of you have ever done the water drops, so here was a setup we had, and we actually had 3 flashes going, one on each side and one lighting the drops from the back. And then we had a genius setting up a computer program to try and time our collision. So, shot right at a collision, you get this kind of explosion of water and you just can freeze it where you see all the little droplets frozen there. And you would never get that without a flash. You just wouldn't. If you want to freeze your little bumblebee in flight, you can use the flash to do that, even in a bright day like you see here. And this just happened a week ago, totally caught me off guard. I was shooting these little milkweed buds, and all of a sudden he just took off, and I just happened to be able to capture him. You may still have some, and this was at a 32nd of a second power. And so you see there is some blur and some maybe a little motion blur, but for the most part, his little face or hers is sharp and you can see detail. And then, if you've ever tried to photograph a spider, unless it's really early in the morning, they're fidgeting and maybe working on their web. So by hitting that with a flash, you're lighting it up so it balances a little better and you're helping to freeze that motion. And here's just a fun one where we were using a flash in a butterfly garden, and this guy was landing on my friend's flash. And so here, using a flash myself, he's kind of frozen in the air as is there. And again, you can see it. And I think this is kind of neat results. You can see the motion of the wings, but he's still kind of frozen. And then one more where this guy at the bottom is sharp, but that guy's in motion, kind of hovering up and down, and the flash made the body pretty much sharp, but you can show the motion in the wings. And again, you could play with different shutter speeds to see the effect that you might get. Here's another fun one where a friend was just playing with the cats and the things, and I'm just ready as the thing's going to go down, and just froze those little kittens right in the air. So now, when we talk
Valerie,
about quality, yes, sir.
interrupt you, that we had a couple questions, and I think it'd be appropriate based upon what you're talking about here. One of the questions was, what's this business of the 1/200th of a second, and why is that? And then another question was, have you ever used high-speed sync? And so those are the two questions.
The 1/200th just refers to your camera shutter speed. So you're setting your shutter speed manually, and shutter speeds are referred to in fractions of a second. So 1/60th, 1/200th, 1/30th. And you can shoot at any shutter speed, basically, even down to 30 seconds long or longer. You just can't go faster than, in my cameras, 1/200th of a second. And not to make it complicated, but back in the day, if you chose a faster shutter speed than what your camera's flash sync was, and you can raise your hand if any of you ever had that, half your frame would be dark because the shutter closed before the full flash duration. But your cameras now, the automatic, they keep it so you can't do that. So it changes. And yes, I have used the high speed sync, but not very often. So just having the power adjusted was enough for that water drop. Where you would use that and where I would love to actually get great shots is if you have like a dark background and you want to get a golf swing, you know, and you want it frozen, or someone jumping and you get them frozen at each stage. But I don't have any images like that.
Thank
But
you.
it's not really any harder. You just set your flash to that setting and get some action going. All right. Was that all of them, Joe? We good?
Yes. Mhm.
All right. So let's talk about the quality of the light now coming out of the flash, because that certainly can be varied. So you'll hear the term hard light. And again, that's kind of a portrait term. It can refer to sunlight, you know, a full sunny day, and definitely on camera flash. So it can give harsh shadows behind your subject. And let me go back to this. So look at this. So you've got that really harsh shadow behind my kitten, underneath the hand. And we've just blasted that hand where it's just kind of almost ghostly. So that would be considered harsh light. It can create strong hot spots on your subject. Some of my shinier animals, you know, had some hot spots on there, and it's absolutely terrible for portraits. So here's a good example of a bad picture. So that would be harsh light, you know, where your flash is right on the camera, and I'm even doing vertical, so the shadow comes off to the side, and you know, just gives that ugly shadow. You would want to, for portraits, kind of eliminate that, in my opinion. Now, softening the light is the better option, and that can make it look closer to your natural light. So your soft light is achieved when your light source, again, is large in relationship to your subject. So if I use, say, a diffuser, right, that can still be very soft light on a bug, right? Because my bug's only tiny and my diffuser is, you know, 50 times, 100 times larger. So it just depends on the size of your subject and your light source. But that determines how soft the light is that will be hitting your subject. And again, you can make the light source bigger or softer by diffusing it. And that's why portrait studios will use those massive soft boxes. So sometimes an umbrella, sometimes really huge soft boxes or soft panels. Now you can use just simply to get started without buying extra stuff. So if your camera has that little built-in diffusion panel, and hopefully you can see that, then that can help just to diffuse the light right there on camera. Or you can end up buying some of these other accessories that could diffuse it. You can even go on Amazon, excuse me, and get just tiny little diffusers that can, you know, go around your flash. Say you're just kind of getting into it and don't know how much money you want to spend, and you can just get these little baby ones. Some flashes even come just with this little dome diffuser, or you can buy like sets of 3 of them for a couple bucks on Amazon as well. So you can use those to help diffuse your flash. And then we talked about bouncing. So say you are going to bounce your flash, you can also use, if your flash has this little built-in diffuser card, you can pop that out and it will kick some light back in there for you. Or you would have to use something bigger to do that if you don't have one built in. So here's an example where I'm outside and I want to fill in shadows and kind of balance the light on the subject. And I'm just simply using a diffuser to soften that light. And so there isn't too harsh a light on the cheeks or anything, and kind of balancing with the brighter sunlight, which again, I don't know if the lady or gentleman that asked this question, here's kind of a good example where I have a very bright light behind there in the shadows, and then I use fill flash. All right. And then you can also bounce, like I just mentioned, so that will also soften it. But there are some things that you need to be aware of. So the height and reflectiveness of that surface that you're bouncing off of will determine how much light is going to fall back down on your subject. It's also important to use neutral colored surfaces to bounce light. Like basically a white ceiling is what most people do, or maybe even a white wall. If you use a colored surface, like say you have a green wall, then that's obviously going to reflect green light back on your subject, which you may or may not want to happen. Okay. You can use, how many of you have these guys? So the giant reflectors, you can have gold, you have silver, you may have smaller ones. So you could use one of those and bounce your flashlight off of that. So the gold would add some warm light to your subject. And this doesn't even have to be people. It could be flowers. It could be anything. And the silver would add a little more contrast or pop. But remember, any bouncing will cut down on the efficiency of your light. So you may have to make some adjustments. And then one other key thing to remember when you are bouncing flash is this term: the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflectance or reflection. And so what that means is, say Joe is 10 feet away from me and I'm going to bounce my light off the ceiling. I want to be bouncing the light to hit the ceiling somewhere at our halfway point, maybe at a 45-degree angle. So the angle that I'm pointing is also the angle, you know, where the light's going to fall on Joe. So you want to do that if you're using a wall or a diffuser or whatever. Know that you want to get your angles right. And if your angle is off, your bounce light may end up in front of your subject, so not lighting them or even falling behind them. So that takes some practice, you know, some playing around. So here's another example. Now this time just bouncing light off the ceiling and it falling down. And it also has a little fill flash in there, so their faces are lit nicely. But now my shadow, which I do have because I'm in a very tight space, is very soft as opposed to a very dark shadow. Now this was the first time I ever did it, but the person that was assisting me with this group shot, this is bouncing off the wall behind me, wall and ceiling. So I spun the flash completely around, had it right on my camera, and now it bounced off the wall and the ceiling. And it was like having a giant diffuser, you know, maybe a giant umbrella, which there was no room for anything like that, and lit everybody up nicely. The people in the back, I needed to kind of bring up the shadows just a little, but that was like a nice large light source for the group. And then just a couple other quick examples. You know, this is where I didn't want any shadows, and I was shooting this medical machinery for a company, and it was all silver in there, and just was able to bounce the light and really light it up from all angles. And even when I had a person in there doing work, just bouncing off the ceiling and coming down, it was nice and diffused. All right, so let's talk about off-camera flash. All right, so that is the most pleasing light to come from a flash. And all that means is you're taking the flash off of your camera, and you can either handhold the flash or you can put it on a bracket, or you could put it on a flash stand. So a lot of wedding photographers will just use a simple flash bracket. And if you don't have a wireless trigger built into your camera, back in the day, we would get this corded one, and we would only be able to go about 3 feet. So that was as far as we could get our light off of the flash. I wouldn't say every camera has it now, but at least a little bit higher end cameras may have a transmitter built right in, the infrared beam or whatever, or wireless, I'm sorry. So you can just set it in the camera and now take your flash off, as long as you have a flash that can go into slave mode, which means that it can fire from another flash. Okay. And that's how you could also, set up a bunch of flashes where you have one kind of as your main flash, and then the others in slave mode. And then another little thing you can do, and these are not very expensive, they're like, well, I'm sure less than $50, is you can buy one transmitter. So I can put this on my camera, and then the other one goes under my flash, and that's a receiver, and that receives the signal and will cause the flash to fire. So there are a lot of different ways that you can get your flash off your camera that are still pretty easy and get more pleasing light. And one of the key things
Valerie,
is,
can you hear me?
lose me?
Yeah, we're losing your audio there. Um,
How am I now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know why it does that. But one of the best things for getting camera flash is it will reduce or eliminate red eye. Affections in eyeglasses. How about now?
We're losing your audio again. If I
Joe,
had
do
to,
you think it's a bandwidth problem?
I think it's a bandwidth issue, yes.
Should we have people turn off their cameras?
Um,
that
may,
help?
that may help. But Valerie, won't you try talking again?
Hello?
Yeah,
Am I
we can
back?
hear. Yeah, you're back
You
now.
know, another
Okay.
thing that you could try, everybody turn their cameras. Sometimes help,
We're gonna stop the videos, yes.
bring them back. Yeah. All right. So getting your flash off the camera can help reduce your reflections in glasses, like you saw some things, and any red eye. Placing the flash even a little bit above, like using that bracket, can make all the difference in eliminating shadows or reducing them. So here's an example where I'm doing a wedding and I want nice even light, and I don't want any harsh light in the glasses. So just kind of using the camera on a flash bracket, and it has a little diffuser and it's nice, soft, even light. And then the same here with glasses. You might see a little tiny bit on the top of his frames, but you're eliminating that really harsh light that you can get reflected back in the eyeglasses, where in a lot of cases you can't even see the people's eyes. Now, since I don't do many people anymore, here's an example where I was using a flash at the zoo, and whatever, I think he's a kangaroo. Man, when I took that shot, man, look at those eyes. He looks like he's gonna like laser beam me in a second. So that's just the blood vessels and, you know, the light reflecting back from the very back of your eyes, and it's nuclear red. And that's because my flash was right on the camera. So again, had I gotten it up higher, you shouldn't have had that problem. And even if he's not looking directly at me, as long as my flash is still going in the eye, I'm going to have that in some degree. And it can be different colors, like maybe you've done this with your pet, photographed them using a flash and it reflected yellow or green. Again, that's just some light going directly in the eye and back out. So again, getting that camera or the flash off camera, you know, another benefit is that you can position your light more creatively. So you're going to learn about, I assume, in that presentation, you know, in-person presentation in a couple of weeks, you know, all different lighting techniques, having your flash, you know, at different angles and everything, such as Rembrandt light. So if your camera is off or your flash is off camera, you can do that as well, just with a smaller light source. Okay. And again, you can use many flashes. You could put gels on your flashes, you know, and have them all over different colors and do some neat effects. Okay. And you can also, you don't have to have them all full power, but just like studio lights, you could have one at full, one at half, one at a quarter. You can change all that even when they're off camera. Right. So here's an example where I needed a lot more power than my little speed lights were going to give me. I was photographing a group like for a play, and there was just no way to even have studio lights in there. And so I bought this bracket, and it would hold 3 flashes, and they could all be, again, at full power or whatever, or an ETTL. And it just added 3 times the amount of light. And then here's kind of a neat thing. This was big back in the maybe early 90s, a thing called by ray flash. And I think it's like they call it, a dish flash maybe now. But if you look, it actually is connected to my Canon flash, and then it comes down and my lenses pop through there. And it allows you, it was intended for portraits. That's how they kind of advertised it, and to give this interest in portrait lighting, which was soft. But since I don't like portraits, let's try this as a macro flash. And so I now had all the control of my nice external flash, but I could use this and just have a kind of small macro light. And then speaking of macro, just a couple quick tips on macro with flash. So I used to shoot insects, and they would all be blurry all the time until I started using flash, and that has greatly improved my sharpness rate. One of the other benefits is I can use a low ISO like I would normally like to, versus having to really crank up my ISO so I could get a decent aperture and depth of field. All right, so I can get greater depth of field, so more of that little bug that I'm only inches away can be sharp. And then I can use that with a diffuser, but here's the key thing, that you have to make sure that your diffuser either surrounds the front of the lens, like you saw in that last flash by ray flash that I had, or can point down right on top of it. So we've made, now you can buy one that costs over $100. It's custom made for whatever lens you use, or you can make one. And here's my awesome makeshift one made out of spaghetti boxes for this new, oh no, it was a Pringles can, which is cool because the inside of a Pringles can is all silver, so it's reflecting your light down. And then I don't know what my friend used for the big part, and then just that like packing material, just the soft foam, that's my diffuser, and that just slides on my flash, and it rests right down on the very front of my little macro lens, and it's perfect, absolutely perfect. So you could make your own, you could buy one. I have not found one yet, after looking forever on Amazon, that will come down and do a great job. And I personally don't like the macro flashes that screw on the front, because a lot of times they spin, they don't have a lot of control. And now that I'm using Olympus, my macro, the front of the lens is only like 49 millimeters. So I'd need something way smaller than are out there. So that's just something that you could do or create yourself. And when I do that, then I have my camera in manual, and then I also have my flash, generally starting at 1/32 power, 1/32. Yeah, I don't know, maybe someone can say it better. But then I adjust from there. So if I have too much flash, then I'll go down to 1/64. Or if I don't have enough, then I might go to 1/16. I just vary that. And here's some examples. And when you're using the diffuser, see, if you don't use the diffuser, your flash will either overshoot your subject or just be so harsh that it might be all black and everything behind. But with a nice diffuser, you just fill in that light and you can see every little creepy hair on these little beetles. This is just a tiny little beetle. And there's your milkweed bug. So those are just some examples for you. And then lastly is just for wildlife. One of the most important things, the reason I use a flash even in a zoo, is I want to add a catch light into the eyes. And that's a portrait term. And it refers to, like, if you don't have a catch light, your eyes will look lifeless. The catch light is just a tiny little bit of light that we normally would see in eyes from, say, sunlight. And I'll show you examples. If we're talking about animals, I would say first make sure that your flash won't harm them or scare them in any way, like maybe owls or any other animal that's nocturnal. Like if you go in a zoo, a lot of times they'll tell you, please don't use flash. You could use on-camera flash or flash on a bracket, for wildlife, whatever works. And again, if you're going to be further than 20 or 30 feet, I would say use that thing that's like the better beamer. And you can get them at B&H or maybe on Amazon. And you could try using ETTL metering, but if the lighting is off, you can just adjust the power. And you may need to go in full manual on your camera or maybe automatic. So here's some quick examples. Here's without flash. And see how the eyes seem kind of lifeless. And then I have pretty deep shadows, but little fox's head is in the sun. There's another example where this whole guy is in the sun, but it's backlit, and so his eyes have no catch light. He's in the shadows, and it just seems almost lifeless. And the same with this owl. Okay, but if you put a flash on, then so this little sparkle right there, that's what a catch light is, and it just now gives life to the animal. And especially if they have dark fur, it will help, you know, light that up so you don't have to mess with it so much in post processing. Again, you can't even tell really that there's a flash been used here, except there's that little bit of catch light in the eye. And here's an example where this owl was pretty far away, and he had harsh shadows because the sun, it was late afternoon, he was coming from the side. And so I popped on my flash, and I think I either put it in maybe full power here or ETTL, and you see how it just filled in those shadows. Now I can see his other eye, some of the other shadows, and can balance out better. And he didn't care. Here I was photographing this praying mantis, and I don't know whether he was chewing on his leg or looking at clean or whatever, but just that flash, he was kind of deep in this flower, and it would have been dark and hard to get everything in focus. So here I could use, you know, F11 and get a great shot with that flash. And then another quick example where here's, and you know, a little bit out of focus B, and it's just flat lighting, it's overcast, and you know, it just doesn't look nice to me. But I took a flash, used it off camera, held it off to the side, and I simulated sunlight and added that shadow. And now that gives more three-dimensionality to the image, and I think it makes it much more interesting with that with the shadow. So you can hold the flash just off to the side and create your own shadows. And then one last example would be something fun that I did with a group, and I won't show it to you yet, but we were photographing the pagoda at night, our camera club was, and when we were done, I had everybody line up in a row. I had them with the cameras on a tripod. I had them, you know, sit there 7 feet for 20 seconds, and just said, open, in whatever aperture I said, it really doesn't matter, probably F8. And I said, when I say go, open your shutter, and so they flick it open. And then in that amount of time, I walked around flashing myself with a flash with a green light on it. And just kind of, it's called horror lighting, where you're using the flash under the face. And it was just messing around. And, you know, all they saw was flashing. They had no idea what was coming, and just were laughing hysterically when they finally got to see their image. So you can do a lot of creative things with your flash, just when you get comfortable with it. So,
Okay, some questions. We had one here. We'll start and then we'll open it up. But is the ETL the same thing as TTL auto?
Through TTL is just through the lens metering, and that's referring to your camera just doing the basic metering for you, and where you can leave it in auto or where it adjusts your shutter speed or aperture. The ETTL is added with flash because it's now evaluating that light and balancing with your flash. So they're essentially the same thing, but you got that little extra letter in there when using flash, if I'm correct on that.
Okay. Any questions for Valerie? Open it up for anybody to ask a question.
I have my club questions.
Okay.
As well. So while they're thinking, here was question number 1. If I have an outdoor subject that is half in shade and half in sun, how can flash help? And so basically using fill flash can help, again, to fill in the shadows. I think I had some examples in there for you, and it can balance that light out more evenly, even with the, you know, image of a butterfly who is in the shade in the bright sunlight. And again, you can place the camera off, your flash off camera. And a way to really fill in dark shadows is to put the flash on the side that is in the deep shadows. And you can just use the flash there, or even bounce it off something to fill in that side. And I'll tell you one other thing I've done something similar is I did a wedding with a black and white couple. And the bride, she was pale white, and the groom, he was a very dark skinned man. And so I had my flash more to his side to try and balance out what I was doing with how the flash was going to be on them. Question number 2, which I slightly reworded: how can I brighten a subject in the shade on a bright sunny day where the maximum flash sync is 1/250th of a second, and the person still wants to use a wide aperture to keep the background soft? So I'm assuming like on a portrait, and you want that nice bokeh background. So I think there's a couple things you could do. You could move closer to your subject if possible. And I say if possible, because maybe you're purposely using a long lens to really maximize that softness in the background. But if you move closer, your flash will be a little more powerful. You could add a neutral density filter and or a circular polarizer, which will then cut down the light coming through your lens, and that would allow for a slower shutter speed. You could also find an area that's more evenly lit, which would be my preference, or go out on a cloudy day, which would also be, you know, easier than fighting that light. Question 3, do I have to use flash in manual mode on your camera, or can I get good results in some automatic mode? And I don't know, maybe they were referring to camera or flash, but this can be both. So you can get great results using ETTL on the flash and your camera in an automatic mode, okay? And I'm saying, you know, in shutter priority, because if you go into aperture priority, that's a little trickier because now you're dealing with the flash's power and not the overall ambient light. So I would probably stick to those. And I think one or two questions. How do I get streaking? So this is a next level one. This wouldn't really be intro, but how do I get streaking car lights using the flash, but I want to show the car is frozen while keeping the lights behind the car as we would visualize instead of in front of it. So this person understands that if they just use flash normally, at the end of the exposure, the car lights are going to be actually in front of the car, which is not normal. And that's because, like I said, when you press the button, your shutter curtain opens and the flash fires immediately. So you can use what's known as rear curtain sync, which causes the flash to fire just before the shutter closes, instead of when the shutter first opens. So even if you have a minute-long exposure, you'll press that button and there'll be no flash until right before your shutter closes. And again, if you use that first curtain flash, it would be in front and blocking. And here's two sort of examples where I used flash at the velodrome with the Pro Cycle racers, and this was just regular on camera flash. And so see how there's this little shaded area of him that would look more natural behind him, but it's in front because the flash fired immediately and then he moved forward. And the same with this. So if you want that to look more natural, you go to rear curtain, which is just a setting. Again, that if that's something that you like to do, you would want to make sure that the flash you're going to buy has that feature. And then the question or the statement, I do not use flash as it's complicated with the power levels and the different curtains and everything else. And hopefully in this presentation, I showed that the flash doesn't have to be complicated, that it can be as simple as put it on, turn it on, and go. So now do you have other questions?
There was one that came in, and Angela, I'm going to ask you to ask the question if you don't mind, because I don't quite understand what you have here.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself.
Okay.
So I have I don't know if you can see me, the Evolve Pocket Flash. And it's still in the box.
Okay, now I got you up there. Okay.
I have no idea what to do. I have two. And I just have no idea what to do with it. So I guess
I only hold that up again. I only saw the case, so I missed what you were.
this is the booklet.
Okay.
So I have two of them. I do product photography And yeah, so I have someone who helps me, but unfortunately he has had some things going on, so I haven't been able to get this thing out of the box. And some of what you said sounds great, but it's not an on-camera flash. I know that. But I don't know exactly what to do with this thing.
Things. Look at the bottom of your flash, and this could be any of you. If your flash is ETL optional, it should have a bunch of little pins that are specific to Canon, Nikon, Olympus, whatever. They're different for each manufacturer, and they tell you not to use, say, an Olympus flash on a Sony, whatever, that you could short it out. These are specific to the operation of your camera. I'm guessing, I could be wrong, but the flash, you only have one pin on the bottom of that flash. Am I correct there?
I'm not sure what you mean by pin. Is this what you're?
Where it would fit into a hot shoe or something, into a stand? Is it
Yes.
not made it to be on a camera at all?
No, not
Okay.
for a camera at all.
I've never really used one of those. I mean, is it actually a flash or is it just a light? Because I would think it has a light like any other,
It is
still
a
light.
flash.
Okay. So what you need to fire it basically from your camera is what I was holding up before, is those, and I don't have it so I can see myself here, is these a flash receiver and transmitter. Okay.
And I think I have
Otherwise,
it somewhere.
yeah, because otherwise the camera has no idea that it's there to fire it. So you could ask that question to the gentleman named Gary that's going to be doing that presentation on the 5th, and he could probably, show you and hook you up in person.
I think, Angela, that would a great way to research that would be go to Google and say, how the heck do I use this particular flash? And I
Okay,
bet you
and
get lots
actually
of
it's gonna
videos
come
on
with
that. That's what I would do. So,
Yeah, because for product photography, the only thing I've used is what are called still lights, and it's two like halogen bulbs that just plug in, and they're just constant lights. They're called, not flashes, constant lights, and they're just always on, and I turn them however I want. So I've never had a flash that didn't, have that control that way.
Okay.
So sorry, you stumped the panel.
okay.
Valerie
Valerie Dick Messner here.
Hi, Dick.
Have you ever had any experience where the flash has hurt the subject's eyes, such as an animal, your snake pictures? I would be concerned using a bright flash with animals or even with babies. People may get red spots in front of them and they soon go away, but I don't know about babies and animals.
Well, that's a good question, and that's why I mentioned in the presentation for wildlife that you want to make sure that flash will not harm them. So if you're in a setting like a zoo, animals outside, it'll be so little with the light, it won't even be really noticeable to them, especially if they're not even looking directly at the camera. For something that's more nocturnal, like my snake and some other critters, even some birds that were in there, place like that will clearly say no flash photography now. And because even your cell phone, if you don't have your flash turned off, that would fire automatically in those low light settings. And so if I was told not to do it, I would not do it, because I certainly wouldn't want to harm the animal. And as far as babies, I don't have any children, but I know when my brother was having his first one, he read every book that was out there, and it did say, do not use flash directly on the children. And so I was not allowed to use flash at all until the kid was like 21 or something crazy. So yeah, you want to be aware of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Valerie,
Any
thank you so much. That was very informative, and you kept it really sort of basic to give us a good grounding in the flash photography, and we appreciate that. So we at the West Shore Photography Club want to thank you very much. And we also appreciate you sharing your notes with us too, because like you said, there was a lot of terminology and stuff that you talked about.
There was no way to write all that down. I mean, or if you screenshotted, you know how some people take pictures during a presentation, it's never going to work. So I thought I'm just going to save you that because it really is detail heavy as opposed to just images.
Yeah.
So I thought it was easier to understand if you had that kind of in writing too. But so here's what you could do. I would love for you guys to stay in touch. So here's the ways that you can follow me, follow my photography. There's usually funny stories involved in most places that I go. I post on Instagram almost every single day except for weekends. Anytime I go somewhere and shoot, I will usually post some of my favorite images on my Facebook page. So you don't send a friend request, just go to Valerie Hoffman Photography and you should find that. You'll see the information also on my workshops under events. So you can see what's coming up and you can see all the past places that we've been. You can comment on images. If I didn't say exposure settings, I have no problem with sharing that. And then my website, if you would, so here's your little caveat for the notes. If you go onto my website, which is right here, ValerieHoffmanPhotography.com, within a few seconds, a pop-up should come up for you to sign up for the newsletter. And when you do that, if you then also go to contact me, then you can just say, hey, I was at the presentation you just did on Flash with the West Shore Camera Club, send me the notes. And then I will have that and I will send that right back to you. I will not send you any other stuff. You'll just be on the newsletter list. If you decide, I don't like you, I don't want to go on a workshop with you or anything, you can unsubscribe at any time as well. So I'm sure we've all done that. But I would love for you to be able to follow. You can scroll down the front page and you can see the workshops that are scheduled now and lots more coming.
Very good. Thank you, Valerie. We really appreciate it. Very nice session.
Let me stop the share here. So
Okay.
thank you. I like Spike's picture. He's got an animal not so happy there. So yeah, thanks folks. I appreciate it very much. I was pretty close to an hour.
Yeah, that was good. That was perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
And-
yeah, so feel free to, send me questions, do whatever. And again, at some point I'll, hopefully be able to join the club and get out to some things with you guys as well.
Okay, and
Right, thank
everybody, will hope to see you at some of our field trips coming up next week. And I think it'll be great. Okay, thank you very much. That's it for this evening, and we're going to sign off.
Thanks everyone.
Okay,
Good night.
thanks a lot, Valerie.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.